Okay, so let's take a look at the Google Doc. So this lesson, we will be going through essays 2 and 3. So I put it in the Google Doc because I hope that you all can actually type on the document first, okay, to tell me how would you approach each of these essays before we actually discuss the answers. Okay, answers. So take a look at this. Okay, so can I get the three of you all, right? Perhaps for A and B, you all can type directly in the Google Docs. Okay, so let me write down here. Yiqing, Zacharias, Anik. Okay, so what you can do for the next few minutes is that for question 2A, right? Let's start with 2A. How would you decide what is the requirement 1 and what is the requirement 2? Okay, can all of you type next to your names? How will you understand what is R1 and R2 that you will need to write for this question? Okay, let's do it first. Anik, you have any idea how to explain? Good. So this is like I said for the last CSQ, right? This is a J1 Promos exam, so they are not out to trick you. They are just designed to make it a very clear test on which student actually study the notes and which student didn't study at all. Yes. So for question 2A, yes, the two market failures they can talk about is externalities and imperfect information. I guess they made it a bit harder because the preamble didn't state this. But for anything involving drugs, right, smoking, drinking alcohol, usually you can look at it as negative externalities as well as imperfect information. Okay, so at the very least, make sure you have enough points for both R1 and R2. Okay, so I'm glad that Zach has tried to do something more. So can I encourage the rest of you? Okay, now that you know that R1 is negative externalities, R2 is imperfect information, how would you explain it well enough to get your grade as close to cursory as you can? Okay, so if I understand for all of you, all right, your objective is mainly to pass. Okay, so all you need is to write enough to hit cursory. Okay, you don't need to hit analytical to pass. So can I encourage you? Okay, fill in as much details as you can. How would you explain why, let's say, negative externalities lead to market failure? Okay, so try to type it away without looking at the rest of the answer if you can. Okay, any questions? Feel free to ask. is the price. To be right in red. Okay, good. Okay. Okay, so Yi Ching and the rest, you have okay, those who have finished, right? You want to go ahead and explain the imperfect information. Okay. Okay. I think basically good attempt. I think all of you should be able to get at least a cursory grade.
For Mr. Tan,
Yes.
can I ask like, what if we don't know the external cost for like for example like for some things, then
Okay.
how
Okay, so if you meet a kind question setter, the preamble will tell you. Okay, will tell you. So there will be some questions where they actually state the example of the externality in the preamble. This
okay
one they did not. So how I say okay, of course, if you have a choice, you don't have to choose that question. But if you have no choice, they'll tend to reward students who are able to read more and know all these things. Okay, what I tend to see for the A level is that they tend to stick to very safe examples like vaccination, like
yeah
education. So we have not seen any unique case where, let's say, for this case they give an example that not many students will know. So yeah, so but of course, if happen to face such a question, the scripts, they are able to be clear on what is the external cost, external benefit, will always do better than the script will write in a very generic way.
okay like but for my
Okay. I guess okay, so there's no need to say employers of parties. There's no need to use the word employers, but you could say that when you take the drug, let's say you get high, right? It's possible, of course, you may drive recklessly and hurt the pedestrians, those who didn't take the drugs. So they are the ones that will bear the cost. So I don't understand why you say employers of third parties. There's no need to say employers. Okay, so long as you drive recklessly, right, there will be people that you will knock down in your car that are bearing the cost. You understand? There's no need to say employers of them. You understand my point? What's the objective of you saying employers of third parties? You might as well be clear and say that the pedestrians who get knocked down by the cannabis taker if you to drive recklessly because of the high from the truck. You understand? Zach, do you hear what I just said?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, so I don't understand. When you say employers of third party, you are confusing yourself, you are confusing your marker.
Okay, can.
Or if you want to say employers, you may say for example, your boss, right, have to hire others to take over your job.
Oh
Okay,
yeah. Cause I didn't explain like, cause I wanted to say like absence from
other
work. Then
employees have to bear your work.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah. Then
that's fine. But employees of third party, I mean, there's no need. Then when you say reckless driving result in accidents, we will expect the third parties will be those people who are knocked down by the person taking.
yeah, yeah.
So you're confusing everyone by the way you write.
Okay, but like if I add on like like absence from work, then lead to loss in labor
Yes. Okay, if you
productivity.
say that, then there's no need to say reckless driving lah. There's no benefit.
Okay, can.
Okay, you want to be clear in your points.
Yeah.
Okay, so the key point is that okay, so to hit the at least the safe C, right? You must say that the market outcome is MPC equals to MPP, but the allocative efficient outcome is MSC because of MSB. Then you draw your graph and you shape the debit loss. So if you do that well, at the very least you will get a C. Okay, cursory. Of course, if you want to hit analytical, you got to explain the debit loss using the marginalist principle. Okay, so for Yi Qing, right? I think your point is fine. Your externalities will definitely get at least a C if your graph is drawn correctly. I see that your imperfect information, you're talking about misperceived cost, so that's fine. So your graph, you have to draw the MPC perceived versus MPC actual. Okay, there's no need to say that MSB got the MPB. Okay, because this question, this R2 is on imperfect information. It might be better for you to say that, okay, if there's misperceived cost, right, I don't assume there's misperceived benefits at the same time. That means MPB perceived and MPB actual is the same. So there's only one MPB. Okay, so that's the point. Anik, any questions about your analysis?
No.
Okay, so we have done this a lot in J1, so you have to make sure that you are clear. Okay, for J1, I'll say externalities and imperfect information, they are very commonly asked. So if you can get the hang of getting the right words to use, the right graphs to draw, there's no reason not to get C for either R1 or R2. Okay, so we don't have so much time, so let's move on to part B. Good attempt. So maybe for the three of you, right, just write the R1 and R2 for part B first. Okay, you can type your own name first, and then you type your points. Okay. Okay, so I'm glad most of you recognize that you need another policy for your R2.
Mr. Tan, I
Yes,
have a question on like the total ban. Cause like the notes, right?
yes,
Uh, cause they talk about the area Y and X, right? But how
yes.
do you like know which one to shift to like make for example
Okay. So
um
you need to draw the total band graph. So I trust that all three of you know how to draw. I would say for since this question is on Singapore, right? You may want to show that the MEC is significant enough at least from the Singapore government's point of view. So uh,
okay
okay, so but I guess it wouldn't be wrong if you draw the case where it is worse if there's a bad. Okay, it wouldn't
okay.
be wrong. Yes.
But like for example for Singapore, like the ban is quite good because like the ban is good because mm, like you can talk about how it's costly to administer, but Singapore is very small, right? So like the
Yes.
cost of monitoring like the activities of like consumption of cannabis
Yeah,
and
those are the limitation. That means depends on what's your other policy. Like. Okay,
okay.
what's other policy?
But if you want to like for example say that there's a welfare gain, right? Then like net welfare loss from imposing the ban. Like which one do you shift to make X bigger than Y?
You want to okay if you want to show that band will lead to a bigger debit loss, you must draw in such a way that the MEEC is pretty small.
Okay.
Yeah, so okay, I can show you afterwards.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, or why not I show you all when while you are typing. Give me a minute, share this. Okay, you can continue to type. Okay, let me try to draw with a mouse here. Okay, so if you draw it small enough, let's see. Okay, so this is the graph that you would draw to show that the band, right, when it's zero, okay, the dead loss from the under consumption will be larger.
Okay.
Okay, so you compare the red triangle with the blue one. So it's,
Okay.
so it's fine to draw this graph for your R1. So you want to say that the band will lead to a bigger debit loss. It's also fine if you show that the blue triangle is smaller than the red triangle. Okay, that's also
Okay. Okay, you can. Yeah.
Let's go back to the Google Doc. So for Yi Qing, right? I would okay. So if you use R1 to be banned, then your R2 of course should be something else lah. So you shouldn't talk about partial ban. So when they talk about ban, they mean total ban. Regulation is a form of partial ban. Okay, but it'll be a bit weird if you talk about regulation for R1. So for part B, right, since they discuss whether a ban, so you should assume it's a total ban. If they want to tell you about regulation, they will not say ban. Okay, so regulation is like partial ban. Okay, so it is true nowadays that depending on which society you live in, right, the government feels that some of these cannabis drugs, for example, they do have some medical benefits. Okay, so in this case, a ban may be the wrong policy. Okay, so let me comment something about our next point. Okay, so Anik, do you understand what I wrote in red? Okay,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
it is not to make sure that MEC equals zero, because like what Yi Qing has typed, right? Any form of activity or goods, even goods with negative externalities, there is some benefit to society. Whether you smoke, right? Whether you drive, whether you do anything, there's always a benefit to society, but there's also external cost. So the objective is not to make sure that the output is zero. Okay, that's the only output where MEC is zero, but that's not the objective of intervention. That's the key. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I'm glad most of you are able to say that R2 is education. So a clue is that because of the imperfect information, right? Public education will solve the root cause. Will address the root cause. Okay, so give examples of the type of public education that's being used in Singapore. From the government's point of view, I think they are more concerned that this cannabis is a gateway drug to harder drugs. Okay, that means while there may be nothing wrong with consuming cannabis, they are aware that in some society, right, once you are addicted to the high from cannabis, you are more likely to turn to harder drugs like cocaine or heroin. And of course, they are aware that we are misperceived in terms of the cost to our health. Okay, so it's about educating people to be aware of the true cost to their health. Okay, so because this part B is on policies, make sure you are able to talk about the limitations of the policies for your evaluating R1 and R2, okay, to get your intermediate evaluation marks. Okay, so for this question, the final stand, I guess, since this question is set in the context of Singapore, right? It's probably easier to have the final stand that the ban is the it's probably the best. I guess okay, if of course even argue that education should be the one, right? It's possible to just justify it well as well. Okay, so either way, take a stand. Okay, I guess from the Singapore government's point of view, because of the paternalistic nature of our government, we feel that there's no room for drugs. It's a throwback to the past because I guess in terms of drugs, we are always very sensitive. Okay, we are very worried about this gateway drugs thing. So if Singapore ever relax its ban on cannabis during my lifetime, I'll be pretty amazed. Yeah. Okay, so that's basically for part B. Okay, any questions before we go through the answers? Okay, so let's go through the answers quickly before we go back to. Okay, so by the end of this day today, I'll give you the answers for both the case study and essays. Okay, let's take a look. Where's the drug one? Okay, so this is the ACJC answer. So I think you got all your points. Okay, so you want to stress the step-by-step way. So for externalities, right? You go through the example of MPC and MPB. Try your best to apply it to the cannabis as much as you can. Okay, so the price paid and the satisfaction, I consume the cannabis. So I'll equate MPC to MPB, so it left to the free market. So this is where the MEC again is the key. You want to give as clear as you can, right? Examples of third parties who didn't take the drugs, okay, but they are bearing some cost because of the drug use. Okay, drug use. Okay, so this is example of MEC. So you want to stress that the socially optimum outcome is MSB to MSC. So as I said, for many of your scripts in your TA, your June test, and then you may have what you've seen in your promos, try not to rush through this part. Okay, the free market outcome is MPC to the MPB, but the allocative efficient outcome is MSC equals to MSB. So this is how you should draw the graph, and this is how you should shape the data class. For requirement 2, okay, so requirement 2, right, you want to stress that it is not the harm to third parties, but rather you are not aware of the true cost or true benefits. So you can explain either in terms of the divergence between MPC perceived and MPC actual, or the divergence between MPB perceived and MPB actual. Okay, so for Yu Qing, she wrote about MPC perceived, MPC actual, that's fine. For the ACJC answer, they focus on MPB perceived, MPB actual. So you want to talk about they misperceive the benefits. I guess different schools will teach differently, but there's actually no need to say assume there's no externalities. It is understood that each market failure can stand on their own. Okay, so this will be the graph for the MPB perceived and MPB actual. So in both cases, there's overconsumption of recreational drugs like cannabis. Okay, so let's look at the part B. Okay, so for the band, you draw this. Okay, so this is the graph to draw. If you feel that the externality is so large that a band is the only policy where MPP goes to MSB goes to MSC. Okay, so this is how the band will work. When you reduce the output to 0, right? This output of 0 is the only output where MSB equals to MSC. So in this case, the band is the correct policy. So this is probably what the government in Singapore view. Okay, but this is obviously not the view of many other countries. Okay, but because we are living in Singapore, so that's the typical case. But of course, if the graph is something else, okay, so long as the graph that I draw, then there may be a bigger debit loss. Okay, so in this
Mr. Tan, so
yes.
like, is it like they give you the context, then you have to answer the question in the context?
Okay, so you're asking whether do you have to draw this graph for requirement 1, is it? Are you asking
No,
that?
I'm asking like let's say like the context they give you is Singapore, but then the question they only just say like, is like total ban useful, like is the best policy to solve market failure. Then that they never say like in Singapore or anything. Then like
Well,
you answer it.
okay, but because the part A is either part A or the preamble is about Singapore, right? Part A, okay, so look at question 2. The preamble has Singapore. The part A also has Singapore. So your part B, right? It is fine to talk about Singapore. So you're asking whether do I have to, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you don't talk about Singapore in your R1, right? In your summative conclusion at least, or in the limitation of R1, it's good idea to talk a bit about Singapore. Don't totally not mention Singapore at all.
So like you basically have to answer the question in the context lah.
Yes, you should.
Oh, okay.
So even though part B, right, doesn't have Singapore, the way the question is phrased doesn't have Singapore, but because the preamble has Singapore and part A is also Singapore, and since part B and part A tend to be linked, you'll be unwise not to mention Singapore at all. Did that address your point?
I mean like addressing Singapore as like a point
Yes, you should.
versus like no, like I'm asking if like you have to answer the question in Singapore's context. Like you say, oh yeah, in Singapore's context, ban is the best policy. Like, is it a must?
So otherwise, you will what? What else will you say about Singapore then?
Like I wouldn't mention Singapore at all. Like I'll just
That'd be
generally
silly lah.
answer.
That's my point lah. That means if the preamble has Singapore and part A has Singapore, even though part B never talk about Singapore,
So
I
you just
think
answer based on how well you do in Singapore lah.
of course you may meet questions where the preamble and part A has no Singapore at all. Then you don't have to. You can, but you don't have to. You understand? But for this question, it'll be foolish for you not to. Do you understand the difference between these 2 points? Do you understand?
Okay.
Okay, so that means if you see another question with no mention of Singapore at all, so let's say you never talk about Singapore at all for both part A and part B, you can get all the marks. Are you clear? You can get all the marks even if you don't talk about Singapore. Even if you do talk about Singapore, you can also get all the marks. You understand my first point? Do you understand?
Wait, then if they talk about like other country, do you mention Singapore?
You
No,
can
right?
mention Singapore.
Huh?
Huh? You can? What do you mean? What?
Okay.
No, because you see questions where there's no mention of Singapore at all. But if you use Singapore as an example, you can. What you have? You can, right? Doesn't mean you must, but you can. You understand? You understand my first point? Okay, my second point is if the preamble or part A talk about Singapore, okay, if you don't talk about Singapore at all in your part B, you probably not get all the marks. That's my second point. You understand the difference between the first 2 points? Between my first point and my second point? I can't hear you. Do you understand? Yi Qing? Okay, so maybe your mic is not working. Okay, let's go on to the part B. So for this part B, right, for each policy, you have to give the limitation. A limitation. Here's okay. So that we have enough time for the second one, let's look at the conclusion. So you can see that when it comes to questions on Singapore, right, it's always good to give points that are linked to Singapore. So here, for example, in Singapore, there's CNB. This is the example of the public education. So here's the final stamp. Any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, we will do the second one. We just go through the answers since we have about 10 minutes left. Let's look at the question first for the question 3. So some of the key points is that for this question is a demand and supply question. So again, they give you some clues in the preamble. Okay, you are told that there's 3 triggers. Okay, let me highlight this. So you have weather-related shocks, higher oil prices, and rising income. So since the preamble has the 3 cases, you may want to elaborate on the 3 events for part A. But take note again that this question has the surge thing. So surge is a word that describes a large jump, a very fast increase in the price. So this is a clue that you have to use elasticity, either PED or PES. Okay, you don't have to use both.
Mr. Tan, may I ask so the R1 would be like the simultaneous shift in the demand and supply, and then the second, the R2
Second one would be,
would be
yes.
like
At
would
least
be-
PDPS, you probably okay. So by the end of the day, you also need to explain the price adjustment. So in AC, that's part under R2.
so
Yes, right,
R2 would be
The
the right.
elasticities
Okay,
as well
okay,
as
can.
the price adjustment. Yes.
Okay, can.
Okay, so I believe if you are able to see that, then when it comes to income change, right, at least say it's a normal good, you can also use YED. Okay, so the demand will rise. Then the weather shock will shift supply to the left. Okay, they also talk about the oil price going up, right? So oil is used as a factor of production. Okay, so a lot of machines that harvest food need to use fuel. So the cost of production for food will be higher. So you shift demand to the right and you shift supply to the left. Okay, so the good thing about this answer is that they will give you the notes to marker, tell you how they give the mark. So follow the notes to get the best marks. Then, as I said, right, for R2, you either use the PED or PES, and you also need to explain price adjustment process because of the word surge. So it turns out that for food crops, the demand and supply will tend to be both price inelastic. So the next step is to explain the price adjustment. So try to be very meticulous in your price adjustment process because it's an essay. So at the original price, okay, I like this answer presentation because they explain the graph well. Okay, so there's a change. Don't get mixed up between demand and quantity, demand, supply and quantity. Supply. Any questions about the price adjustment process?
I'm kind of confused because like I didn't know like there can be like simultaneous like the price elasticity for like demand and supply.
Simultaneous, as in both can be inelastic at the same time.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
food crops is one of those goods where both demand and supply is inelastic because Food crops by definition to many places is a necessity. The price of the food is also very small proportion of most people's income, and more importantly, there's no substitute. There's very little substitute for corn, for wheat, for rice.
Okay.
In this case, the demand is definitely price inelastic. That you're clear, right?
Yep.
And food takes a long time to grow. Food is harder to store. So when there's a long gestation period where you cannot store a lot of food crops, the supply will also be inelastic.
Okay.
Yep. So food is one of those goods where both the demand and supply is inelastic. Manufactured goods, on the other hand, right, you will find that many of them, right, the demand and supply are both price elastic. Let's say, for example, cars, right? Cars are definitely the higher price, the high proportion. Cars, you can easily store the unsold cars. So there's a lot of spare capacity. Yes.
Okay, can.
Okay, good. So explain price adjustment. This is it. So that's how you explain. So for this question, so long as you are able to talk about demand shift, supply shift, mention either PDPS and explain the price adjustment, very easy to hit level 3. Okay, level 3. But to get a pass, yeah, it's just about getting the graph right, and you just talk about demand and supply alone is good enough for level 2. Okay, so let's for the last 5 minutes, let's look at part B. Discuss the policies that governments could use to address rising food prices. So this reminds you of what Yi Ching has asked, right? So let me double check again. This question, okay, has no mention about Singapore. So question 3, okay, no mention about Singapore, the preamble and part A. And this part B is also not about Singapore. So discuss the policies and government. So it's a plural. Okay, plural. So when it comes to this question, so in case Yi Qing is still not clear, okay, for this question for part B, right? Of course, if you talk about Singapore as well, it is fine. It is not a penalty. But you don't talk about Singapore, you can get all 15 marks for part B. So you are aware, for example, based on the questions we did in the past, right? Singapore, we do have policies to address rising food prices. Obviously, we encourage people not to waste food. Okay, not to waste food. We also have our 30-30 plan. Okay, we want Singapore to produce 30% of our food needs by 2030. Okay, so we have a lot of policies that encourage local food production. We also have policies to make sure that we get food from more countries rather than just the traditional sources of Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, countries that are near to us. We try to get food from more countries that may be further away from us. Okay, you may have done that in your June block test at CSQ. But the point is this, okay, if you use Singapore in your discussion for part B, that is fine. Okay, that is fine. But if you don't mention Singapore at all for part B, you can also gain access to all 15 marks. Okay, so I hope Yi Qing, with that explanation, you are clearer of what I meant by my point 1 and point 2. I hope you are clearer. Okay, so let's look at the points. So for the policies, if you don't want to use Singapore at all, the standard policies are of course price ceiling. Okay, you draw this graph to explain how it can address rising food prices. So the standard limitations are these. Okay, again, they give you good tips on how to get analytical. Then for requirement 2, right, you can use subsidy. So this is quite similar to the promo question on electricity. I think a lot of students use price ceiling as well as subsidies. Yeah. Okay, so for part B, there's no need for requirement 3. Just have two policies good enough. Okay, so you of course you can have public education. So here's the final stand, the overall stand. So because this question is not on Singapore, right? You can always evaluate based on what country they are. So for this case, right, can you see how they did mention Singapore? Yeah, so that's fine. You don't need to talk about Singapore. You can still get all the marks, but you put Singapore, it's fine. So this is option 1. Let's see the other option. Okay, so there are a few more. Let's take a look. So the good thing about price ceiling is that there's no cost to the government. Okay, the government doesn't have to pay for price control, but the government have to pay for a subsidy. So depending on whether the country has enough reserves, if you have a lots of reserves, right, subsidy is better than price ceiling. So price ceiling tend to be a lot of undesirable, unintended consequences. Then of course there's option 3. So the good thing is that here they give you a few options. The list is not exhaustive, so just make sure you write enough to give a good justified conclusion. Any questions? Are we good?
No questions.
Okay, so the rest of you are fine. Okay, so I will upload the video for both, and I will give you all the answers by the end of the day. So all the best to your upcoming sub